We set up a lab bench in the garage, so that became our garage. Didn't have a telephone in the garage, didn't do any business in the garage, didn't do any designing, but we would hook up a computer that had just been built, test it, and if it worked, we'd put it in a white box. Test the next one, and then I'd fix it and put it in a white box. Test the next one, fix it. Test the next one, it works. And after we had about, 10 or 20 white boxes, Steve would drive them down to the store and get paid cash. And that was the little garage era. But before we ever delivered one of those Apple I computers, and we were just feeling so good about ourselves. I had my job for life at Hewlett-Packard as an engineer, and on the side, this Apple computer is getting noticed. A ton of great press about this upcoming computers in the home, and the big computer companies were the ones saying, nah, it's never going to be worth anything. It isn't going to be able to do any computer jobs. It's going to be a little hobby thing and go away. Okay? Because nobody could really see where it could go. Even Steve and I couldn't really see what it was going to lead to that would eventually make it so valuable. But before we ever shipped an Apple I, I had designed the Apple II, and that was a fresh computer design from the ground up with some amazing, amazing things. And a lot of it was boiled down to price. I had taught myself to design computers with fewer parts than anyone else in the world. Just clever approaches and ideas to things. And one of the things I did was, when my mind was in a very hazy mode, I'd been awake for 4 days and nights to finish Breakout for Atari. Steve Jobs said you have to do it 4 days and nights. My head was very, very drifting, it was kind of like not inhibited. And I thought I saw a little white dot crossing a screen that was normally black and white TVs back in the early days of Atari. And I'd go in at night, because Steve Jobs worked at night because they didn't want him around any people. The people didn't want him around. So this little dot's going back and forth, but it was changing colors like a psychedelic light show. And I'm thinking, color TV. They could use color TV in games. That would be so beautiful. And up popped an idea in my head to basically generate color with a $1 chip instead of the $1,000 analog method of the old days. All sorts of differential calculus equations and sine wave mixers. Can I put it out with some simple ones and zeros out of a $1 chip? And I knew everything about TV. Yeah, the TV is going to be fooled. The TV is going to think it's color. And what I'm really proud of is that this digital color method never was in any book on color television. Couldn't be in any book. You have to be able to think fresh. It's like, leave your mouth shut and be thought an idiot rather than open, leave no doubt. That sort of thing. We had hired presidents and operations people, and Mike Markle had guided us. He was a mentor, and he owned as much of Apple as Steve Jobs and myself. But you never hear about him because he wasn't the one that came up as a young kid.
So in those days, you must have had a lot of people telling you, you can't do this isn't possible.
They were right. They were right from their point of view, because companies like Hewlett-Packard, companies like Digital Equipment, Hewlett-Packard turned me down 5 times. Digital Equipment Corporation, the big computer companies, IBM, they would say, these little machines with the little processors just can't do any of the jobs that computer users are doing. We are familiar with the market, but the market was the buyers of these tens of thousands of dollars computers. The buyers were the people who bought $1 million computers, and they didn't access the new market, which was dentists and nurses and philosophers and engineers and inventors and students and teachers. Everybody else in the world, they didn't have a way to say, do you want a computer? And computer was a magic word. It was like, do you want your own space rocket? Because computer science in those days was further out than space rocketry. When I went to college, Introduction to Computers was a graduate course. So I got an A+ in it, but I almost got kicked out because I wrote every program I could, and I found out they had these things called budgets. And I ran our class 5 times over. Pretty well thought out who I am. I know myself very well, my core values, because I was about 25 years old. But when I met Steve, he was 16. When we started Apple, he was like 21. And during that 5-year period, he and I were very much like each other, going to concerts, buying Bob Dylan bootleg records, reading words and talking about philosophies of life. And then when we started Apple, Steve really wanted to spearhead running a business and making, profits, which is very important. Man, I totally bought into all the good ideas of, price the product so that we'll make enough profit. We don't have to continually borrow money and run out of money, and that we should be marketing driven. Understanding the customers was much more important. Hewlett-Packard was engineering driven, but only for one reason. Back in those days, Hewlett-Packard made the products that engineers used as their tools. And when you do that, every engineer designing a product is part of the market. They know its value, so they know the marketing and the engineering both. So Apple would be marketing driven, and really we had a collection of a lot of good people at the start, and there were other groups of two little kids in jeans in school trying to build computers. Nothing great like the Apple II, nothing with color and graphics and pixels on the screen and game paddles built in and so few chips, it was unbelievable. Nobody else did that, but there were all these companies, but they didn't have the professional accountants and salespeople and, and operations and technicians and manufacturing and a president overseeing it all. They were trying to do it, all themselves.
Come up and flame out.
But they also weren't that professional, because they were designing machines with what's called static RAM memory. And the only way to make the computer affordable was dynamic RAM memory. Harder to design, but I'm an engineer, and I like saving chips and saving money. So that's the only direction I would go. But every single other one of these 20 other little companies claiming they had the little affordable computer kits, they were all just copying the Intel design, the Intel data sheets, and putting it into hardware and selling those pieces to you. And they all used none of them did a good engineering job. They just copied the type of memories that were shown on the Intel data sheet. In Apple, we took a screen, and we didn't call it a screen, we didn't call it a display. What did we call it? A desktop. Because every human being in the world knows what a desktop is. We looked for the human paradigms and then write the software to work in the human ways. So the Apple II had a keyboard like a typewriter, and you saw letters on your TV like you saw on a typewriter. So it was very familiar to humans, a big step from every computer before it.
Sounds like a foundational element in everything Apple's sort of done since then.
Yeah, and the whole trend, I look back over the trend of Apple's history and personal computer development and evolution, even to products that aren't computers, but computers are inside of everything nowadays, like iPods and whatever. And I look at that evolution, and every step we tended to put more and more work into making them work easier with normal humans, not having to memorize and learn as much of the stuff. Now, yeah, there have been points where even Apple would get an operating system, just add more clunk to it, change a few words, and change where things were, make it more difficult over time. Those kind of grew wildly. But look at our new operating system on our iPads and our iPhones, we're holding it very, very stable, simple, and not letting it bloat up in every way. Steve didn't understand that. And I held my ground. I said, well, go get another computer. That was my answer. And the reason I wouldn't give up 8 slots was not because it was important to have 8 slots in my mind. It's not that I really disagreed with Steve that 2 slots might do the trick. It's that I had developed something very clever with 2 chips that let 8 slots work. And the other method of the older days that everyone else was employing in their computers took 5 chips for every board you plugged in, plus a couple of nasty, expensive thumb wheel switches. So all these other parts, I was saving 40 parts with the 2 that I'd come up with by a clever method. Well, if we cut it down to 2 slots, I still have my 2 chips there. And, it doesn't look like I've done something really wild and impressive. So that was actually my real reason. We were very young in those days. And that got into this open-close thing, that basically I wanted the computer from day one. Our manual would print all our schematics, every code description we could of how to program the computer in different ways and how to design cards that plugged in and did things for you. Very open world. We're building the base. You go off and extend it in any way you want to. And over time, Steve always tried to predefine a product that was closed and had limited expandability. Do things, inventors do things, the real people that kind of think out of the box with a good idea that actually works. But also motivating students is equally important. The floppy disk story is one where, when we came out with our Apple II computer, and we were, thinking, we've got the best computer in the world, someday everybody will own these things. And the programs were on cassette tape. So you'd put a cassette tape into a player and push play, and the tones would come out of it. Beep. And when you heard the beep, your program was in memory, and if you were lucky, it worked. That's how long it took. Well, we had a meeting in one year, and they were going to allow the 3 personal computers, Radio Shack, Commodore, and the Apple II, I'll make that up higher, and the Apple II, into the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, Nevada. Whoa, Las Vegas. I've heard of that place in movies. I've heard of the lights, the big casinos. That's the highlight of gambling. Whoa. But we were going to send 3 people. Mike Markula, our marketing guy and funder, Steve Jobs, and Gene Carter, our sales guy. 3 Apple employees were going to go to Las Vegas to show off our Apple II computer. And I couldn't say, I was too shy to say, could you spend the money and send me so I can see the lights of Las Vegas? So I raised my hand in the staff meeting and I said, if we have a floppy disk, can we show it? Mike Markula said yes. Well, now I knew that if I developed a floppy disk in 2 weeks, normally a man-year project, in 2 weeks
like
I get to see Las Vegas. I had never worked or studied a disk drive of any type in my life. I had never worked with a disk operating system in my life. But if I could develop something where you could say run checkbook, and it ran the checkbook program, I got to go to Las Vegas. The motivation, when it's a personal reason like that, not stock options, not salary, not awards. Oh my gosh, I started thinking out, didn't know anything about them. I studied a floppy disk drive. I got rid of 20 chips on it, saying you don't need those chips. Just run the wire straight over from a little board all design in my end of the computer. And I did clever Wozniak designs, and it was 7 chips. And I could say, run checkbook, and it would run. And then I said, I haven't got a real disk controller. I've got something that will do what I want, which is run a program, but it's not a real disk controller because disk controllers have 50 chips, including one big LSI chip that does the whole job. So what if I left out? I'll study a competitor's design. And I opened up a competitor's design, studied all their chips, understood them. I said, oh my gosh, I've hit another winner, another home run. Mine does more. So I knew I had a great disk drive, and the motivation was to see Las Vegas.
And how was that trip?
And the trip was great. I had one programmer helping me. We worked every single day, including Christmas Day and New Year's Day, every day up to Las Vegas. And we finished up the last bit of code, getting it to work at 6 a.m. in the morning in the convention center in Las Vegas. But Randy Wigington, he was a 17-year-old programmer that I'd met at the Homebrew Computer Club. We'd walk on, I taught him how to play craps, and he won 35 bucks. I taught Steve Jobs how to play craps on that trip too. And we're going to be actually speaking that natural language recognition is going to get better and better. And when I stutter, it's still going to understand me. When I say that I want 5, I want 8 books on my shelf, it's going to understand that I changed it. It's like natural humans have very robust hearing systems. Robust means a lot of different inputs. The way something can be said, you can still understand it with one meaning. And computers have got a long way to go to that. But I found that ever since a year before Apple bought Siri, I used Siri and was saying this is the wave of the future, and I still believe it. Because I could say things like, I'd like a reservation at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse in San Francisco for 4 people at 8 p.m. tomorrow night, and it would get the whole thing. And then I'd say, navigate to, Tom's Laundry, and it would get the whole thing. Navigate to the Renaissance in Schaumburg, and it would, take me there. But I could say, what are the 5 largest lakes in California? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are questions in life, and I think we're going to go further and further with that. I eventually want it on my watch.
So I lied about the last question. There's one thing you told me about last night that I thought related to that. You had to find a taxi last night, right?
Yeah, I had to find a taxi, and I used Siri, and I said, I'd like a taxi, and sometimes it instantly, you just have to click, okay, send it. It knows where you are. No, but there's 15 companies near you, so they're all probably, one person in a home. And I picked the one that had a few stars, all the others were unrated. I called them, okay, yes, I need to go right away to Milwaukee to get to a concert that I wanted to see for 40 years. And she says, okay, and I'm waiting. It was 50 minutes before I got a taxi. So I was 20 minutes late.
From here last night,
20 minutes late. I wish I could have known that, but I don't know. Someday, but maybe 40 years from now, these little smartphones are going to be so smart to say, Steve, you really ought to have a backup plan.
All right.
But
Steve, thank you very much for your time today. Great stories, great wisdom. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.